Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Writing Lounge. I'm Allison Fraiberg, and today we are going to focus on critical thinking approaches or how to analyze anything. So let's jump in, shall we? For those of you who don't know who I am, this is who I am. I'm a professor of communication and cultural studies in the School of Business and Society at the University of Redlands. I teach the courses you see on the screen, and I also focus on leading many of our short-term business-focused study abroad courses. You can find out all sorts of information about me and the programs I work with by clicking or pointing on those QR codes or the information, email, that kind of stuff. The URLs are over on the bottom right there. Okay, so let's start on how to analyze anything. And in order to do this, I think we need to start here, which can be a little odd, maybe. I believe that there's no such thing as writing, which may come as a bit of a surprise since I'm a professor of communication. But what I want to do is talk about what kinds of writing there are. You know, in the same way that there's kind of no such thing as math, but different kinds of math that we use for different purposes: algebra, geometry, calculus, trigonometry. We use all those types of math depending on what we need to do. And it's the same thing for writing. We use different kinds of writing for different kinds of purposes. For example, if you're writing to summarize, you're going to write a certain way. If you're writing to evaluate, you're going to write in a different way. Report, analyze, explain, all those different types of purposes. You're going to write in a different way. So I instantly have a visceral reaction when someone says, "Oh, I have to write a paper." Well, what are you trying to achieve? Right? And we're going to focus on analysis here. Now, I'll give you an example of why we need to be really clear about the purpose before anything else happens. Let's say, I'm going to come over here, and let's say you're summarizing something. You're doing a writing project and you're summarizing something. But let's say your instructor or the person who's actually given you the writing task, could be a manager, could be an instructor, could be a professor, really has in their mind that they want you to evaluate. But you know what? They don't send us to assignment writing school. So we might use words like explore or discuss when we're asking you to do something. And that can mean different things to different people. So when I say discuss, I want you to evaluate something, but you interpret it as summarize, then it doesn't matter how beautiful the summary is, because you haven't done what's been asked of you, even though, quite frankly, it was my fault. I wasn't clear. My fault. So it's really important that we get clear about what we mean by these terms. And we're going to focus on analyzing today. And so the first thing I want to do is get clear about what I mean and what's generally understood when people ask you to analyze something. It's a little equation, sorry for all the math references, a little equation I've come up with over the years that has really helped when I'm trying to explain what analysis might mean or what it includes. And I think there's two components. There's a demonstration of understanding and a component where you need to contribute something. So, demonstration of understanding of the texts and positions and contexts regarding an issue or a problem. In other words, you have to show you know what people have said about your topic. But then you also need to contribute to that conversation in some sort of meaningful way. Demonstration of understanding and contribution equals analysis. Now, I kind of think of it with an analogy, and that's the dinner party. Here's a group of students who are on a consultancy project. If you're interested in doing the global consultancy, you could just check one of those QR codes that I had for you earlier, or go to redlands.edu/consultancy. But here they are. And in so many ways, analysis is like arriving late to a dinner party. Who's there? How do you join the conversation? How do you make a place for yourself at the table? These, in many ways, are the same things you go through when you're trying to analyze. Now, think about it this way. You're late. What do you do when you come late to a dinner party? You listen, right? You listen to what people are talking about, and that's what you do for analysis as well. Here we go. These are dead-end approaches to analysis. These are not the way to enter the dinner party. Okay? I really start to worry when people say, I want to prove something. Because that means they've already decided. They want to prove X. This is what they believe, so they're going to prove it, and that's the way it goes. And this is a writer in a situation where they're really not trying to discover, they're not trying to analyze. They're just trying to validate what they already believe. That's not analytical. Now, I'm not saying that's not a valuable pursuit, but it's not analytical in any way. Good analysis seeks to answer a question, to figure something out, to determine what you don't already know. So I'm much more excited when I've asked someone to do an analysis when they start their chats with me that say, I want to figure out whether, I want to figure out how, I want to figure out to what extent, because that means you don't know the answer. You don't have a position you just want to dig your heels in on and have validated by a bunch of research out there. So think about it that way. What do you want to figure out? And to do this, I really recommend you start with a question, not an answer. Now, in so many writing instructional situations, you're taught to have a thesis right away. And I don't think that's very analytical. If you're trying to analyze something, if you're honestly trying to figure something out about a topic, then the first thing you should do, the first project you need to do, is get to a question you really want to figure out the answer to. And this is a step we often miss. Then I think it's really exciting. Once you have that question, you investigate, you reflect, you synthesize, you consider, you do research, you do all this kind of stuff to figure out the answer. And then you get to a decision, a claim, a thesis that your paper can then seek to prove or seek to argue for. Okay? But don't forget this wonderful space of asking a question. It sounds simple, but it's really not. You get a good question, then the task becomes simple because all you have to do in your writing project is answer that question. Now, what do you want to figure out? Here are 6 critical approaches for analysis. This will help you analyze anything. I'm going to talk to you about them each and give you a little prompt sheet that will help you get through any of them. But these are 6 critical approaches, and they'll work whether you're trying to analyze one thing, whether you're trying to analyze 2 things, or whether you're trying to analyze 3 or more things. And I'll go through them. Right now, we have an application, unexpected similarity, unexpected difference, omission, assumption, and recuperation. Now, the first critical approach to analysis is an application. And you're probably quite familiar with this because many of you have probably done this. This is when you have a concept or a theory or a tool, and you're trying to use that as a lens to understand a situation, a case, a business, an organization, a context. you're using one concept to try to understand a situation. And you can see here, your guiding questions would be, what's the context? What's the concept? What's the context? How does the concept apply to the context? And why is this significant? In other words, you're trying to show how a concept or a theory affects, alters, or helps you understand a situation. Now, what would this look like? I'm going to show you. Here we go. Ready? Here's an application in action. You use it when you're analyzing how a concept or theory affects a situation. First thing you're going to do is have an introduction or a guiding question. Remember, we were talking about those questions? How does concept A apply to organization X? That's what you're trying to focus on. And that's what the beginning of your paper needs to do, or your beginning of your writing project. The next thing you need to do is explain the concept or the tool that you're going to be using. Excuse me. Then you need to introduce the context, the situation. Maybe it's a company. Maybe it's a situation at a company that you're going to use this tool to help with. Okay. First, you explain the context, then concept, then you explain the context. And then you spend a lot of time showing us how the concept applies to the situation. Okay, these are not paragraphs. This is just the direction of a paper or writing project that tries to do an application. And then the most important segments are these. Why is this significant? And what are the implications? Okay, so you can see it. This is an application in action. What's the question you're trying to figure out? What's the concept? What's the situation? How does the concept affect the situation? Why does it matter? And what are the implications? What does this mean for the future? And that's a beautiful application. And you use an application when you have one concept and one situation. Now, our second critical approach comes when you're trying to look at two things, maybe two companies or two situations at a specific company. And this might actually remind you of projects when you've been asked to compare and contrast. But the problem with being asked to compare and contrast is you end up with glorified lists of things. Here are the three ways this is similar. These two things are similar. Here are the three ways they're different. See, they are both similar and different. Okay, that's a lousy project. You hated writing those? And trust me, we didn't care about reading them. Okay, because everyone already knows that stuff. So it's really an exercise in spinning your wheels. It might be a preliminary brainstorming exercise, but it's not an analysis. Instead, when you're looking at two things that seem really different on the surface, an interesting comparison analysis is one that finds an unexpected similarity between two things that seem really, really different. Okay. So first you have to isolate what the key differences are, because those are expected. Then you have to focus in on an unexpected similarity that's present, and then talk about why that matters. Okay. Let's see that in action. I'm not going to go through step by step, but you get the idea, right? So your intro, your guiding question is, wait, why are we talking about these two things in the first place? Then you explain the two situations, the two cases. Then you briefly summarize the differences that everybody already sees. The expected differences between two things that are really different. Say, for example, you're looking at Walmart's operations versus the operation of a little mom and pop shop in the town you live in. Those are things that are really, really different on the surface. But maybe you can identify an unexpected similarity and have that be meaningful. All right, so that's the next step. Identify the unexpected similarity. Then you would show and explain how that similarity appears between the two situations or cases. You can't just say there's a similarity. You have to actually show how it appears. And then, most importantly, why does this matter? What's the significance? What are the implications of the unexpected similarity? Okay, it's a great way to do a compare and contrast paper where you're really digging into something unexpected and revealing something. Now, the other version of this is you're looking at two things that look an awful lot alike. Now, for example, I don't know, for someone like me, companies like Google and Facebook or their parent companies look an awful lot alike to me. It's big tech, right? But maybe there's an unexpected difference that you can pull out of those two that would help you understand something in play culturally, technologically, business-wise. Okay. So same thing as unexpected different or unexpected similarity, except it's unexpected difference. Everything else kind of remains the same, except we're flipping it. We're looking at two things that look an awful lot alike on the surface, and we're trying to dig into a difference. Okay. So critical approach number one, application, great when you're looking at one thing. Unexpected similarity, unexpected difference, they're great when you're looking at two things. Now, the last three are great when you're looking at three or more things. Companies, situations, positions, industries. You're looking at three or more things. There's lots of voices going on. Now here, the first one we're going to look at is the omission. And this is when you're listening to a lot of conversations, a lot of stakeholder positions, a lot of the research, and you're hearing all the conversations that are going on because that's vital to an analysis. But you notice that something has been forgotten or left out. And I'll give you an example that I still remember. It was a paper, believe it or not, from 20 years ago. I still remember it so vividly. It was during the Enron debacle or round of ethical disasters in the early 2000s. And this student was looking at all the conversations about what was going on with Enron and the other organizations, WorldCom, that were all basically not doing good things. And he noticed that everyone was talking about ethics, but only in terms of at the executive level. So it was all C-suite stuff. And he thought, wait a minute, why is no one talking about what's going on sort of at the middle management level in terms of ethical processes and things like that? This is something that he thought was really important, but nobody was talking about it. So he wrote his paper about what had been left out of the conversation about Enron and ethics. And it's fascinating. And I remember it 20 years later. Here's what that would look like in action. So again, you have your intro, your guiding question where you're trying to explain why this topic matters and what you're seeking to do, what promise you're making. Then you would explain the context and parameters of what you're going to look at. What are you focusing on and why? In that student's case, he was focusing on debates about ethics in the Enron era. So you have to summarize the consistent themes and patterns in the research about the topic. In other words, you have to talk about what people are saying, and you have to show you're aware of what people are saying and have said about this topic, because you can't show an omission until you show that you're very aware of the debates that are going on. Then you would identify a relevant concept that seems to be left out by the research and debates on the topic. So that's what you're going to hone in on. What's missing for that student? It was middle management and ethics and what's going on there. Then you need to explain the relevance of that omission, because if what's being left out is irrelevant, then there's no point, right? So you have to show why what you're identifying as being left out is relevant. And then you need to explain the significance and implications of this omission. And do you see how that creates a real opportunity for you to contribute. If the first part of much of these prompts are about demonstrating understanding about the voices that have come before you, the last couple really are about what are you going to contribute to the conversation at this dinner party, if you will, this analytical dinner party. So that's omission. Now, sometimes it's not about people leaving out stuff. Sometimes it's about people assuming or taking for granted something that ought not to be. And that's critical approach number 5. Again, multiple voices, and you're trying to listen to those voices, listen to the debates, listen to the research, listen to the conversation, and notice that everyone's assuming something. And I'll give you an example on this one. Amartya Sen is a Nobel Prize winning economist, and many years ago, he wrote this. Well, he's written many, many things, but there was this article on globalization. And he was looking at pro-globalization positions, anti-globalization positions, and everything in between. And he noticed in all those voices that there was an assumption. And everybody, regardless of their position on globalization, they made an assumption that globalization was moving from north to south and west to east. And Sen took a longer view and said, wait a minute, this is an assumption of contemporary debates, because if we look at globalization historically, it's moved in all sorts of different directions. And it's only now that that assumption has taken place. So if we broaden our perspective, we can have a larger and more nuanced understanding of globalization. So he recognized the assumption and figured out why that mattered. Now, you don't need to do Nobel Prize winning work in economics, but you can use this critical approach to notice something that's taken for granted or something that's assumed. And it's the same kind of process that was there for the omission, except instead of finding something that's left out, you're going to isolate on something that's relevant and assumed or taken for granted. And then you're going to figure out why that matters. Number 6, it's not about leaving something out. It's not about bringing into the conversation an assumption that everybody's been making. This one is about recuperating an idea that has been dismissed. So all those voices, all the conversations that have happened, they're all clear and they're all in agreement about dismissing something, some sort of idea. But you're coming to the table and you're saying, wait a minute, idea X, which has been dismissed, we really need to recuperate that. We really need to reconsider it because it's changing the landscape of what we're analyzing. And it would look like this. Again, like omission, like assumption, you have to show you know what people have been talking about. And in this case, you have to show how they've dismissed an idea. And then you focus on saying why we need to rethink this and what's the significance of doing so and what are the implications. So here we have our nice little summary of how to analyze anything. If you're looking at one thing and you have a tool, you do an application. One company, one situation, do an application. If you've been asked to compare 2 things, instead of making a big compare and contrast list that bores everybody to tears, why not discover an unexpected similarity between 2 things that look really different on the surface, or an unexpected difference between 2 things that look really similar on the surface? Finally, if you are looking at a bunch of voices, you're hearing a bunch of voices about a topic, try to pay attention and see if you can isolate something that's been left out, or something that's been assumed, or something that's been dismissed, It needs to be recuperated. Talk about why this needs to happen. Show that the tendency is there to leave things out or to assume or to dismiss. And then really hone in on why you want to bring what you've isolated back into the conversation. And that's how, if you have one thing, if you have two things, or you have three or more things, that's how you can analyze anything. All right. So thanks for coming to the Writing Lounge, and we'll see you next time.